Hello friends, my name is RagePanda1 and we are back with our Sentinel leveling guide. This time we're doing the Forge guide, and this is going to be based on what they're putting up on Maxroll.gg because you know we got to test them all and see if they're any good. So far we've had some absolute winners that I've loved extremely a lot, and we've had some other ones that have not been my favorite. But I think it usually comes down to personal preference rather than the builds not being good. Every build that I've tried has been extremely strong and been able to do what it needs to do, but sometimes you need to know a thing or two about a thing or two to make it work. One thing I've noticed looking through all of these guides is that when they do a Sentinel, they're using volatile reversal in pretty much every build. Always using it. It must just be the best thing ever, and we're going to find out today how much we really like it. I'm sure it has something to do with a more damage multiplier that they really enjoy using, so I look forward to finding out what that's all about in the later stages of the game. I'm also looking forward to doing a minion build that's a little bit non-standard. We're going to be making a bunch of weapons and buffing them, and they're going to get the stats of our weapons. So the most important thing we can do is get a really strong weapon. And we're going to be crafting most of those unless I happen to have something in the stash that's extraordinarily good. I might make an exception this time for twinking characters since it makes such a big difference for the leveling process. You can see they care a lot about melee attack speed, and they're doing minion damage over time as well as fire penetration. Wouldn't be surprised to see some chance to bleed or chance to ignite in that slot being also quite good. And we have damage over time on this weapon, but I think that that's good, but I think you're getting into god roll territory if you're going for all four of those. But hey, we've got a crafting system, so we might be able to make it work. We're also going for commanders. We're going for turquoise. Both of those things mean added minion damage. So once again, we're not the star of the show here. The weapons that we're creating to go around and attack for us, they are going to be the star of the show. And I'm excited for that playstyle. I think it's going to be fun. On the gloves, more attack speed. We really, really like attack speed. So it seems like the moral of the story for gearing is you're getting as much attack speed as you can, you're getting as much minion damage as you can, and you're trying to apply as many dots to the target as you possibly can. One thing that means that not everybody who's leveling knows is that you don't need crit in this build at all, because you're doing all of your damage from dots, and dots cannot crit. So when we come down to our gearing section, they do talk a lot about the really good stuff that you should put on your gear, and I appreciate that. They've got best suffixes, damage over time for minions, of course, chance to bleed, chance to ignite, that's what we're looking for. But what they're kind of missing here is telling me what to avoid, because sometimes there are stats that are just really bad for your character and you don't want them. And sometimes when somebody's an expert on a thing, they expect everybody who's brand new to understand the basic concepts, such as the fact that you're doing a dot build, you don't need crit. But I think that a lot of people using these guides are newer players, and they might not be aware of that, so it might be something for them to consider adding in the future. They do consider the pros to include having easy gearing and insane damage, as well as a very consistent playstyle, meaning we're not respeccing all over the place. And they've got heavy damage scaling from the weapon, meaning that one good piece of gear can make a huge difference for you, which is really nice. For the cons, we're talking about managing minions, which I don't think is that bad, except that we're going to be trying to hit our minions with one of our own attacks to get a buff. I think that there's a trick for helping to do that I'm going to show you, and you can turn on the health bars for your allies so that you'll be easily able to identify where they're at in the middle of combat, and we'll get to that a little bit later in the video. And I find it weird that one of the cons is that it's a multiple button build. I mean, it's fun doing one button, that's fine too. But I don't think it's a con doing multiple buttons. That's a little bit of a weird take. One of the cons, though, is that you're constantly summoning minions because they don't last very long. I do usually find that annoying, but we're going to summon our minions by doing attacks anyway, so I think I'll be fine with it. They are showing us an early game build here, and they even talk about what to do pre-level 5. Once again, Tarek wrote this guide, and I really love the way that he puts them together. This is just talking about spamming the one ability Rive, and then lunging as far as you can, as fast as you can, as often as you can to try to get through the campaign, and I appreciate that. But then it goes straight into the final setup, which is fair. Like, it's going to get you there. But I have a fun little thing that I've been doing that I think you might enjoy, and I'm going to show you what I would do instead. Is it better? Probably not. But is it really fun? Yes. Step number 1. Acquire a spoon and make it hot. Step number 2. just keep spinning and spinning and spinning and spinning and get yourself some mana cost reduction and some movement speed and just keep spinning. Since we're going to get started on the actual build, I figure I'll put in the pieces of gear that I need and also the skills that they're actually telling me to use. But the most important thing, the weapon, I've got some extra melee physical damage. I've got some increased damage over time for minions on here as well, and some increased damage over time. So hopefully that's going to mean that we're doing a lot of damage over time, because remember, all of our weapons are going to be copying those stats. I don't know if the increased damage over time for minions will apply to all of the minions, because they are my minions and they are not each other's minions. Does that make sense? So I have a feeling that's not going to transfer over. They'll just get that benefit once, but that's fine. I do have this unique belt, which is giving me extra chance to bleed, which is good. I have this idol, which is giving me some chance to ignite when I have high health, and I have some chance to ignite on my necklace. So we're going to be doing a lot of bleeds, a lot of ignites, and trying to increase the damage of my minions and the damage over time. We're basically doing exactly what they want. Let's see how this thing works and how we can ravage all of our enemies and have a great time doing it. I do think, apologies if you can hear my furnace kicking in, but hey, I live in the frozen tundra and I've got to keep the house warm, right? So one thing I wanted to talk about here is that after we were done with our main sentinel tree, getting everything we needed, we went straight into the paladin tree for 5 points. It's nice. It gives us a lot of elemental resistance and some attunement. I think that's all great. It also unlocks healing hands. And then we go back into our Forge Guard tree and start getting some other things that we might need. But the thing is that we're going to be using healing hands in this build, but we're using it with this node, Cleric's Hammer, that gives us a chance on melee hit to proc healing hands. So we're gonna, every time we do a melee attack, use healing hands. But we ain't gonna start doing that until level 35, so I'm not super sure why they have us doing that just yet. So the build is extremely fun to play. And what we're trying to do here is we're trying to build up our stacks, which you can see in the bottom left by my health bar. When we get to 3, we drop a big hammer, and then we try to use our Void Cleave to buff all of the swords that we have summoned, and it's a pretty fun playstyle. And the swords are nice and glowy, so you don't even really need to turn on the health bars, but I will show you quickly what that looks like, and it can help a little bit in super dense situations, because there are times where that actually matters. And I gotta say though, I'm doing a ton of damage with this build, and it's really fun to use, and I'm having a great time with it. So in this early game portion, I would highly recommend trying it out. I'm having fun so far. If we go into our settings though, we can go into gameplay and we can display our health bars over our minions. And then you can see we've got a little green bar over everybody's head. And that neon green sticks out like a sore thumb when you're in the thick of combat, and it's going to go over the top of all of the random enemies that are in your way. So if you're just having a hard time aiming your ability to buff your minions, which you might do, then I suggest that you turn that on so it's easier to see. There is something to be said about the fact that there is a ramp time for this, and you do have to do some basic attacks and get some stuff going before you really have everything that you're trying to have going. But when you get it going though, it's amazing. It is truly amazing. You just have a horde of daggers and swords flying around doing your bidding, and it feels real good. And even our regular attacks are doing a ton of damage. So the minions are doing even more damage than me, but I'm still doing a lot of damage, and that feels good. Now personally, I'm going to keep the minion health bars off. I don't think that I need that. And I think it's going to be fine, because when you're just clearing randomly, you don't have to buff every single minion. And when you're fighting a boss, they're going to be grouped like this, and it's going to be easy to hit them anyway. I just thought in case you wanted to know the tip, it's there for you. We got to check out a little bit of boss damage here, and since I just randomly fight this guy in every video, I guess that's what we're doing. We're just testing some damage against him. Why not? Alright, here we go. Boss time. I missed all my minions, but what are you going to do? There we go. Now let's watch those ignite stacks go. This might be the most damage I've ever done to this guy this quickly. That's pretty wild. I'm pretty happy with that. This is another one that's like an absolutely stellar build. Just really, really good. It's great at clear. It's great at movement. It's great at bosses. I really hope this keeps up into the end game because this is fantastic. So I think there might be a tendency for people to try to do their forge strikes only at maximum stacks after their multi-strikes every time. You actually don't need to do that. You don't even have a cooldown. You can just spam it. Now, I think you should try to keep your minions summoned at a maximum every time that you can do that. I can currently have 10 of them. And I'm just saying that when you're at 10 of them, you can maybe spam some of your abilities and not have to worry about it so much just to clear a little bit faster. You will run out of mana by doing that, so it's a bit of a balancing act, but I'm sure you'll figure it out. Actually, a really quick note that I just realized is that every time you do your Forge Strike, you're summoning dudes again, and when you summon them, the other ones die so that they can be replaced. And when you're doing that, you're actually losing DPS. So not only is it okay for you to just spam your other abilities when you already have maximum minions, if you're not doing that, you're actually losing damage. It's time to head into monoliths, and we have gotten past level 35, which means we got to specialize into healing hands. So now when we do a regular melee attack, we're going to be healing ourselves, which is fantastic. The problem is that it takes a lot of mana to do that, and it's a little bit prohibitive sometimes. It ain't the end of the world, but it is what it is. We are working towards nodes that are making it cheaper to do. Here's another criticism that I might have done different, and this does not make me correct, just so we're all clear. This ward per attunement is good. The increased healing effectiveness is good. However, this mana cost thing is more of an issue than I want to deal with, so I would much rather spend a point over here, getting a little extra damage, adding the -5 cost right away with 1 point, instead of having to put a point here, 2 points here, and then we're only getting a -2 cost. But we are gaining some area with that, and maybe they found that to be more important. Personally, I feel like I'm getting healed with it every time anyway, and the thing costs 11 mana, so if you want it to be free, you got to take all of this anyway. So this would have only cost us 1 point to switch over into getting this, and later in the tree they plan on getting the Vow of Restoration and Urgent Healing, and I'm sure that those are great. But if we lost 1 point from Vow of Restoration, would we really be losing all of that much to go over here and get a little extra damage? I'm not sure, and I'd already be solved on my mana issues, so maybe that's a fine point of dispute, and it's not really that important. And for those of you wondering if this node would make it so it doesn't heal anymore, well, we know that it doesn't, number one, because this game is good, and it would tell you if that was the case. But also down here, farther down the tree, where you would have had to take that node to get there, it has ones that are increasing the healing done by it. So, small point of contention, probably not a big deal, but I would have rather had full mana cost reduction as early as humanly possible, and being able to spend 2 points to already get 5 off of the cost would have been huge. With all that being said, I do have some new rings. I've got my turquoise stuff. This one is just here for the resistances and because the implicits are really strong. By the way, somebody told me I can't call these intrinsics. My brother in Christ, that's not how words work. These stats, the minion damage, health, and critical strike, are intrinsic to this base item. That's what the word means. So, I mean, I ain't hating. I'm just saying. If I say implicit or intrinsic, please understand it means the same thing. Then over here, we've got a similar situation. Although strength is nice, physical damage is nice, we also just needed resistances. But we wanted to make sure we had the right implicits. Unfortunately, we don't have all the best rolls on all of our implicits and all of these pieces of gear in general. The necklace is all right. We got what we got, and we're just going to worry about it when we get some purples that actually make a difference to us. This should get us through our first monolith, even though our resistances are pretty terrible. We know that we're just doing normal anyway, so who cares, right? Who cares? It's time to start blasting and getting levels. That's all I know. So we are going to make sure that we build up our swords right away, and then we're going to start going around just having a good old time. Then I'm going to start dashing around. And you'll notice I'm completely out of mana right now. Completely out of mana, and if I'm multi-striking, that means that I'm even more out of mana. So I'm at the mercy of my mana regen because of the way this healing hands is working, and I do not like it. I think that was a huge oversight. It makes it so that there are a few levels where you're just not going to be doing a good job. You just can't really be doing an effective job. Now they do say to use Vengeance. If you really need to just be spamming something, just use Vengeance. That's why it's on our bar. Vengeance is giving us some mana back, and it's just being used again right away with Healing Hands. But it does let us recover to some degree, so I think that's the band-aid fix that they put on it, but we could have just made it not be a problem. To be honest with you, that's probably the way that I would have gone about it. But once again, you notice I'm going through this without killing every single thing that I see, and that's going to be perfectly fine. We do have a lot of stuns, so I probably could have tried to stun that guy, but I was well aware that my minions were about to be falling, so I didn't want to do that. Back in no mana land. There we go. See, the lack of mana is what's making this a problem. And when I get a couple more skill points, it's not going to be a big deal, but until then, I hate it. It's bad. And I'm not even looking at the guide. I'm doing what I'm getting this mana reduction, and then I'm going to this one and back to these two. I don't care what the guide says, because that is a huge, huge oversight. There we go. On that guy, I was able to get my combo off right away, and we didn't have to dance around him for an hour trying to figure out what's going on. So, now we've got our extra skill point. Now it's probably not going to be that big of a problem, but for the first monolith, that was not good. I probably would have just done it the other way. But hey, we got the monolith done very efficiently. The build is still super fun, still just getting better and better with every point we put in, and I'm really happy about it. And that, my friends, is a Root of Ascendance. I find it's always good to pop in and let you know when we're switching into a different passive tree instead of just continuing on the path that we've gone. So, we've gotten 10 points into Smelter's Might, and the very next point that we're going to put in, we're actually going to the Void Knight tree for 10 points here, so that we can get our Volatile Reversal unlocked, and at level 50 we'll be equipping that as you see here, and using it as a damage bonus. Now, I find that the Void Cleave is a huge damage bonus. I'm getting up to 80 or 90 Ignite stacks and having a really good time with that one. Now, after those 10 points, we're right back into the rest of our tree being exactly the same, all in Forge Knight, and we just follow along the path, so that should be fairly easy. I do have a small concern that my new weapon might not be the single best option that is available to me right now. It is purple, which is always good, but that does not mean that it's better than any random rare. What it does have that I didn't have before is it has 30 extra damage in the implicit section, which is great. It's got 60% physical damage, also great. Some attack speed, once again, pretty awesome. But it also comes with 43 minion melee damage, meaning we're going from, I think it was 31 to be exact, for the base damage of the previous weapon. My minions will be getting 103 base damage off of this one, and we still have a bunch of increased damage over time. The reason I'm worried about it is because we're losing 60% chance to bleed, so I'm looking for a Bardish as soon as I could possibly use one, but that's not going to be in this video because it's like a level 70 weapon. So hopefully this does a lot more damage because I had to shatter my other one to get the increased damage over time for minions. Either way, we're stuck with it. Time was absolutely flying while I was playing this build, and I gotta be honest, I was having a great time. And much like how you could tell I was having a bad time on the last one, I'm sure you could tell I was having a great time on this one. There was a lot of choices to make here, and there was a lot of depth to the build that you might not expect. There's a certain amount of value in choosing any one of your abilities that you're going to cast. You need to cast them all for sure, but there's sort of a branching priority list of what you're trying to do. The first thing you want to do is get the maximum amount of your swords out as you possibly can. Then, you want to Void Cleave all of those swords to make them do a lot more Ignite damage, and that Ignite damage really added up to be considerable. I didn't notice too much of a loss when I switched weapons and lost a bunch of my bleed chance. I still had some, but I think the overall added damage that I was getting just from that twice as good, 3 times as good of a base damage upgrade, I think that made up for it, even though our build was going for damage over time more or less. I did notice a little bit of a point where it was my mistake on the Healing Hands, which is that they only put it at a 50% chance to proc before they got the mana instead of a 100% chance. So we actually ended up getting the mana at the same time. I just was getting more healing at the time, and they had less of a situation of running out of mana because you're getting a 100% proc rate on Healing Hands. So that was actually my mistake. And as far as the Volatile Reversal, there's not much of a reason to be taking this on every single build that you're doing as a Sentinel, but on this one they do have Time Rifts, which is an ability that makes it so enemies will take 60% increased damage over time. That is a decent buff. Increased damage over time is always additive, so it just adds on to what we're doing, but 60% is considerable, considering we only had, I think, 120% to begin with, so that is a pretty good increase over what we had before. However, I have been seeing this move used on basically every build that they're doing with the Paladin, and maybe I just didn't realize that every single build they're doing with the Paladin is trying to do damage over time, because then it makes sense. Otherwise, I don't get it. It is, however, an instant cast ability that is free to cast, and it does a little bit of extra damage, even if that's all you're getting. If you just had an open slot, why not? It's fine. So on the first mission that we just did there, when you get to the little pile of bones that summons a bunch of skeletons, that can be a really annoying fight if your damage isn't working right, and especially when you're doing minions, because your minions are all going to go single target attack all of the little skeletons that spawn, and they never attack the thing that actually needs to die. This build didn't have that problem. I absolutely shredded through that thing, and it was really easy to do, and there was no issues getting the job done, so I was happy to see that. However, when we got to the last boss, there are some areas in this game where doing melee attacks just don't work that well. All they gotta do is increase the hitbox. There's only a few of them in the game. There's the giant worm boss at the beginning of the campaign. They've got these pillars around this last boss for the first monolith. There's a couple of places where the game just needs to figure out its hit detection, because I'm struggling during this boss fight to get all of my dudes summoned and to be able to actually kill these little phylacteries or whatever we're looking at. But when it came time to actually do damage to the boss, I was doing considerable damage to the boss, and I did notice a little bit of benefit from the volatile reversal, although I didn't get all the way deep into getting the full benefit of that yet, because my levels just weren't there. Would I continue leveling like this? Absolutely. This build is really fun. It's the sort of melee build where you want to be feeling like you're doing melee combos. You know, you don't just want to hold melee attack and go. So they put it as a con that it's a multi-button build, but I think there's a lot of people who want to feel like they're doing some sort of martial combos with their swords, and you get to do that with this build. And on top of that, you summon a whole gaggle of Light Sabers behind you, and I even considered putting on the legendary gloves that give me bees, because the idea of bees and lightsabers flying through the air sounds terrifying, and I want to be a part of it. I did feel extremely tanky on this build as well, and I only died one time when I was limit testing how tanky that I could be. So that has a lot going for it. The smoothness of leveling up this build is really great. Anything that I said negative in the direction of this build is a very minor complaint, so don't take that to heart. If you want to play a Forge Knight, which I didn't realize I wanted to do, by the way, how come they didn't tell us this was so awesome? When I read Forge Knight, I didn't think it was going to be all that cool. I didn't think it was going to be that exciting. I didn't think the abilities were going to look that cool. But man, I have summoned the pet before. The pet looks really cool. All these swords are awesome. Being able to interact with them to add fire damage by using another ability that just happens to do a lot of damage for you. There's a lot of great stuff going on in this build, and I think that it's got the right amount of micromanaging where you get to be engaged and have fun, and that's why time went so fast for me while I was doing this, because I was focusing on what I was doing and having a good time doing it. But it's not overbearing and annoying. Like, you have to keep summoning your swords, but they last a long time. It's not like it's going to be that urgent. It's not every single combat that you're doing. It's just something that you're watching as you go along, and I really like it. I think the developers did a great job making this build viable, and I think that Tarek did a great job of turning it into an actual build guide and making it shine really well. It's almost easier to talk about builds that are not very good or not very fun. This one was just a delight. Like, if you want to have a good time and you like playing melee dudes, go have a good time. If this helped you to make any decisions about who you're gonna build, or maybe I just helped you have a good time while you were eating your snack tonight, whatever it might be, go ahead and throw a subscribe on the channel. I would love to keep you around for further viewing. You can expect more reviews like this one of build guides on maxroll.gg, and I'm considering expanding that to include Diablo 4 in the next season, and I definitely will be expanding that to include Path of Exile 2 when that launches at some point in the future, eventually. For now, I want to thank you for watching. I have been RagePanda1, and I will see you in the next one.